Blast radius, you're watching Techstrong Gang. Hey everyone, happy Tuesday. You know, for those of you who don't know, we record these shows one day in advance, but what a difference a day makes, right? We recorded on Friday. It was a very different sort of reality. Now here we are recording this show Monday for Tuesday, and everything we said on Friday, at least geopolitically, might have gone out the window. But as we sit here Tuesday, I can't tell you what's going to happen tonight or Wednesday. Every night is, I try to get up in the middle of the night and check my news sources to see what's going on over in the Middle East. But it's certainly been a memorable weekend. Lot going on. You don't come to us for your news like that, but let's jump into the IT of it. We've got a great gang we're going to talk about. You know most of these people, so I'm not going to go through a whole thing. We're going to try to get right to the news today. But let me quickly say, we have on the gang today the one and only Kimberly Bates, JP Morgenthal, Stephen Foskett, the Dean Mike Vizard, Bonnie Schneider, and myself.
Am I the only one that has flashbacks of Hollywood Squares when you do that?
Kind
in
of.
the little corner.
So here's the real question. Are you Paul Lynde or Charlie Weaver or...
I'm not Paul
Joe...
Lynde. No.
I love your little Paul Lynde.
But then who's Charles Nelson Riley, right?
Charles Nelson Riley. There Joanne Worley. There were some great people on there. But anyway, hey, I'm trying to get right to the news today. Mike, IT blast radius, what do we got?
So I think everybody's on knife's edge, kind of waiting to see what happens here. I think we're all collectively hoping for the best and maybe starting to think about preparing for the worst. And you have an article over on techstrong.it, Alan, talking about some of the concerns ranging from, will there be, budget freezes on IT to what are the cybersecurity implications? But let's start off with you. And there just seems to be a lot at stake here, a lot more than 48 hours ago, that's for sure.
Oh, yeah. So, and do check out my article on techstrong.it on this. Generally speaking, there are some people who make a lot of money during war, and there's some people who lose a lot, and not just money during war, right? War is not healthy for animals, pets, and other animals, children, and other living things. And so I'm trying to remember that from when I was 8 or 9 growing up in the Vietnam War era. But, generally speaking, when there's chaos in the world, people try to, they get tight. And IT budgets generally get tight. And so you might expect to see some of that as a result of recent events. However, as I wrote in my article, I think with this particular, the particulars of the Iran-Israeli-U.S. triangle, unless someone else gets involved, what we're seeing is not so much a pullback of IT budgets, but maybe reallocations of IT budgets, right? We could talk specifically about cyber, but when you've got 3 of the world's preeminent cyber warfare countries involved here, and make no mistake, Israel, well, the U.S. is in a class by itself, and Israel's probably close behind, and Iran is no slouch, right? You got to expect that there will be cyber repercussions here, and cyber fallout and cyber attacks. So as Jen, is it Pataki? Jen Easterly, former CISA person, wrote on LinkedIn this week, hey, shields up. Shields up. Now is the time to put on your maximum cyber type of defenses. And that may mean spending a little bit more money immediately, getting, whether it's manpower, SaaS-based services, whatever. But now's the time to burst up your cyber defenses, because stuff's going to happen. I can pretty much tell you. On top of that, I think this is also going to give rise to a big IT sovereignty push. We've been talking a lot about IT sovereignty over the last couple of weeks, few months. But this is going to really put some rocket fuel in the tank, right? You don't want your people stuck in a country where the airspace is shut down. You certainly don't want your data stuck in an infrastructure or internet or hosting where it's been shut down or not available to you. So I think IT sovereignty projects, obviously cybersecurity projects, and then everything seems to benefit AI, doesn't it? A lot of people say, hey, we need to be able to do more with less. We might have less people. We need to have more automation. And so I think you'll see an increased push into AI, accelerating what we already have on the board. So overall, I don't think budgets will be frozen. I think budgets will be reallocated. It's a tremendous time for more digital transformation. But those three areas that I mentioned, and I mentioned them in the article, are prime from spending and for activity.
Kimberly, do you think that sovereign clouds will get a big boost? I mean, we've already seen a lot of countries who are normally allies of the United States saying we had nothing to do with this, so they're already kind of positioning themselves accordingly. But will that get extended out to where workloads are placed?
I think that's just going to continue. I don't think it's, we're already on that march. I mean, it's a fait accompli, in my opinion, with countries creating their own sovereignty environment and wanting the data there. And that goes even beyond this blast, that we're in the middle or potential war. It goes into all the geopolitical, who owns my data, I am in ownership of it. I think the biggest issue here is the cybersecurity, because if you want to attack and not be seen as directly attacking America, which is, where the threat of the president has been saying, don't attack, our soldiers, don't attack America. That's the way to go. In some way and somehow we are exposed. Many of our infrastructure areas are probably exposed and they don't even know it. They still have the password of 123 admin or something along those lines. And so Jen Easterly's post that if you haven't read it, she did a great job on a short piece that was up on LinkedIn that I reposted from her. Very good, marching it down. Every cybersecurity CIO, executive needs to go and check their list about where they're at, and then probably do, if they haven't done it recently, probably do a tabletop exercise about where they're at. I mean, it's really because that's, they've been known to attack that way, and we've attacked them that way. So we've got, sandworm and all that kind of stuff, the history of that. So we'll pass on.
Stephen, is the thing that we used to call the cloud devolving into essentially managed hosting 2.0? I mean, it feels like we're just getting smaller and smaller, and the clouds are becoming more disaggregated. So I don't know, is there a fundamental change in the way we think about IT architecture afoot?
Well, it's interesting that to consider the cyber implications. Of course, when people are dying, it's sometimes difficult to think about, the implications on business. But I guess if we want to talk about that, if we want to figure out how this works, I think we need to think about how all of this impacts everything that we do on a daily basis. So certainly, to your point on the architecture and the design of the global infrastructure that we're deploying, we cannot, as IT pros, pretend that what we do isn't impacted by global events. As you all mentioned just now, the involvement of the U.S. in the attack in Iran, the denial of involvement from other countries, specifically Europe and Australia, the concern over these state-sponsored threat groups. As Kimberly pointed out, it is very obvious that these threat groups, that's going to be the vector they're going to use to strike back. It seems very obvious to me because what we've taught the world over the last couple of decades of doing essentially nothing about these advanced persistent threats, at least nothing on a diplomatic front, is that you can attack us and not expect any kind of response. And so Iranian threat groups, so they've got APT 3334, which is probably the same group, which has the charming name of Helix Kitten, and APT 35, which is the charming kitten. 3334 targets infrastructure elements. 35 has generally targeted businesses, including the famous election interference, the HBO cyber attack, that sort of thing. I think that we'll definitely see both of these threat groups active going forward, where they're trying to figure out ways of inflicting some damage on the West, generally, the United States specifically. I know that Israel has been actively under attack for the entire time of the operation since October 7th, but and of course before that as well. So yeah, I think that all of us, we need to recognize, as Kimberly said, that they're coming for us. They're coming for all of us, and it's going to affect the way that we deploy applications, where we deploy those applications, what we can expect from them. And I think it highlights the questions that we've had previously about sovereignty, data sovereignty, and cloud sovereignty. We have to think about, where are we deploying applications, and what is the geopolitical implication of that?
So I just would add to that, though. Yes, we've got to be wary and put our defenses on high alert, DEFCON 5 or whatever. But let's not forget offensive cyber capabilities that have been put into play here. Right? And I'm going to give you two quick examples. One is Israeli, right? Many folks in Tehran and Iran have said that their internet has been shut down. Now, there's conflicting reports. I've seen reports that it was, Israel that shut down Iran's cyber. They've cyber attacked and shut down their internet for periods of time. I've seen other reports that it was the Iranian government themselves that have shut down the internet so that voices of dissent can't take advantage of the situation in terms of regime change or gathering support, or as well as giving out potentially strategic information about where attacks have been, how effective they've been, and so forth. But Israel is an offensive cyber powerhouse. And quite frankly, so is the U.S. We have a cyber command. We have the USA. Don't think for a second that as part of this attack over the weekend, that cyber assets were not put into play to suppress Iranian communications, because at some level, the internet's communications, right? And this is a game as old as humans. When you're attacking, you want to suppress communications of the enemies, of your enemy. So I am more than sure that as part of this attack package, besides the B-2s and everything else, the cruise missiles and everything that came with it, there was a cyber blackout zone that we laid down there to thwart command and control at the time of the attack. Offensive cyber.
Yeah, and we seem, we've heard explicitly in the press conference after this attack some of the tactics that they used militarily. They were using, it seems, air-launched decoy drones that are designed to emulate other types of aircraft. Those of us in the hobbyist area, I am an ADS-B hobbyist. I have an ADS-B radio receiver in the roof of this building, actually. And we were all used as well as part of the ruse, because the ADS-B network, they openly broadcast that a bunch of B-2s were heading west from Missouri. They openly broadcast that, and all of the enthusiasts were able to see those bombers taking off and heading west. on Saturday in the, Saturday morning, Saturday afternoon, I think a lot of us were like, hey, what's going on? Why are all these bombers taking off? We were also seeing a whole bunch of refueling tankers taking off from bases all over the United States. It was a really interesting situation because essentially, rather than having these hobbyists snoop in on activities that they're not supposed to see, they used these hobbyists as a way to broadcast a decoy mission going in the opposite direction of the actual bombing group, which headed east. And certainly, I think that we saw some of this cyber operation. I think we're still in the early stages of figuring out what was cyber and what was not. But as you point out with Iran and their internet going down, I doubt it was the entire country being shut down by their own government. I have a suspicion that the U.S. was involved in that too.
So, Stephen, I appreciate. I love the fact that you were involved with this.
Yes, unfortunately, I was used by this. I was
fooled by the use as well, because I saw that post up there when it's like, wow, this is shocking. I think I brought this up several times because our utilities, state and local governments, have very often, or particularly state and local governments, very often have been underfunded with how they, with their IT organizations, money goes elsewhere, et cetera. And for that reason, those are the areas that are probably most at risk. And since they own a lot of the utilities, I think about here in Boulder, the utility they don't own the electricity, but they do own the water system. And so you question and ask, okay, so how much are they doing there? What are we doing in terms of hardening those areas? And the other piece of it is that their groups, their gangs that they have, the kittens, they have running around all over the place.
Why does it have to be kittens?
I don't know why it has to be kittens, but the kittens that are running around, anticipating that they have been worming their way into our systems. And whether or not they want to start flipping the switches now, that's going to be, there's the option. So,
if not now, when?
Right. If you're not going to do it now, when are you going to do it? Because, the regime change. Well, don't say that. That's
anyone who's ever watched a Star Trek episode, right, knows that before you attack, you raise shields. And I don't know, but it seems to me lately that, this administration decided, let's go into battle and we'll keep shields low so that it costs less money and it's not as expensive. So I just, it's that feeling of like every other time we've ever gone into any conflict anywhere, right? Cyber defense was a critical factor and, confirmed and managed appropriately. And in this particular situation, it seems almost like, nothing's going to happen.
Well, maybe they didn't want to alert them by putting it. But here's the fact. It's not just state and local governments or critical infrastructure. Yes, critical infrastructure will absolutely be a target. But what a lot of the Iranian hacktivist type of activity is more about sowing chaos, discord, aggravation, attacking healthcare kind of things, trying to bring down a healthcare network. Just like not just what you would think of as your typical public utilities, critical infrastructure. They want to just create chaos and havoc and annoyance, if you will, even. But you know what, JP? I hear where you're coming from, and you think about, what were the real goals of this U.S. venture? Were they accomplished? What will be the fallout? And we could debate that on the political spectrum all till the cows come home. But I gotta believe that there are some smart people in the government who either before this or as soon as it was announced, went to DEFCON 5 or whatever the level of preparedness is, and we're on this. I mean, it would boggle my mind if
We've
we
lost
didn't.
a lot of good people in the government with,
I know we have Jen Easterly being one of them. And Chris Krebs another, but there's still good people there, and the NSA are not sleeping at the wheel. So, and I think
the
Cyber
other
Command.
thing I think that we need to be wary of is sponsored terrorist organizations
Yes.
by Iran. It's not just Iran that is likely to operate. And in fact, if I were Iran, I certainly would play a little bit of Don Corleone here, and my hands are clean. I didn't do anything, right?
No, I think you're absolutely going to see the Houthis and the groups in Iraq, right? Because for all intents and purposes, for the billions of dollars we spent in Iraq, ridding them of Saddam Hussein, it's become somewhat of a proxy state for Iran. And these private militias and so forth, the Shia militias there, I think they represent the biggest threat, especially to U.S. troops who are in bases throughout the Middle East. So that will remain to be seen. Anyway, though, it is one last aspect, and we don't have a lot of time I wanted to cover, was the technology for the actual attack itself. You could say what you want about America, but we make a damn good weapon. No one does weapons better than America. No one does these kinds of bombs with stealth bombers. And you know what? Even with the current F-troop in charge of the Pentagon and everything, it was as near as can be told a flawless execution here with top flight technology. And, we could probably do a whole segment on that the tech involved, whether it be the GPS and the bombs and nary a shot was fired at these planes from what's been said. So kudos to American technology, especially when it comes to making weapons. We may not make the best cars in the world anymore, but goddamn, we make the best weapons. All right. Let's take a break here at Techstrong, gang. We'll come back and talk about an AI land grab.
Hey folks, we're back and shifting gears to some more traditional technology coverage, but there is an AI land grab underway. SoftBank's Masayoshi-san is pitching a notion called Project Crystal Land, a proposed $1 trillion AI robotics center in someplace in Arizona. I'm not quite clear exactly where, but apparently we also have already seen these things in China, and the Europeans are talking about building their own. So JP, what's going on here? Is everybody going to be basically looking for some large amount of land to build some sort of AI complex, and this is the next big thing in real estate, or is this the next big bubble?
It's so the first thing is it's still undergoing certain approvals to get to pass and become an actual initiative, right? It has certain government, allocations that it's looking for, certain waivers in order to be approved. But the concept is interesting. They do this in China today. It is, this concept of a manufacturing center for the most part, where they're leveraging the technology for artificial intelligence and robotics to build out next generation manufacturing. Now, if we look at what's happening in the U.S., it's a really interesting time. We have, and it is attached to our political stature at the moment. We have an administration that's come in that's been, very pro, let's bring manufacturing back to the U.S. Many advocates have said there's no way you're going to get Americans to work in factories like you did in the old days without creating a product that's too expensive for Americans to buy. This is an attempt to say and the interesting thing is, it's not Americans who are building these factories, right? This is not U.S. dollars that are coming in building these areas, but but it would still benefit a town or an area within, I believe it's Arizona, right? You're building hundreds of square miles of factory that's going to need administration. It's going to need people to, be operations management around this. It can have the effect of building a community of people and schools and businesses around the people that have to go there and live there, because it's in the middle of nowhere right now. If it's electrical based, you would hope they bring with it a top-notch energy source, which would drive electric utility vehicles, cars, things like that. Everything would be electric, so it wouldn't be necessarily a gas run. You'd have all that operations around just maybe even supplying the fuel to make this thing run and keep it going, right? So there's a tremendous upside to the concept. I think the example that is trying to follow, it could work, has been demonstrable to work in other areas. I think they have some other things they need to figure out. We're a capitalist society. Kind of hard to say that we're not going to allow a non-American to do this, but if the government wanted to drive with American initiative behind this, they could say, no, you're not an American company. We're not giving you any dollars to fund this, right? If you're an American company or you partner with a large American company to do this, then we might give you those dollars. So it's very, very entwined with policy and governance in order to get the full ROI to the U.S. that it does. And then ultimately it comes down to raw materials, right? Because now you're still up against that mentality of tariffs and bringing in raw materials. We don't have raw materials. So now if you automate the development, building this product entirely, where are you getting the materials to build those products, and what is that cost overhead going to add to it? So it's an interesting model to watch. I don't know if it's going to get kickstarted here with this group. He has a great idea. Maybe he could be one of the partners of a large group that is doing this, but I think that certain things need to change if it's going to become reality.
Stephen, can we actually do this, or is this just a little bit, wishful thinking?
It's wishful thinking. No, I always take things about when it comes from SoftBank, I always take them with a bit of a grain of salt. This is a company that makes huge promises and made huge promises for an audience of one between 2016 and 2020, and now they're making those huge promises again. Essentially, they're saying what the Trump administration and Trump specifically personally wants to hear. They're using huge numbers, $1 trillion, as a suggestion of what they might do without actually having any kind of prospects or financial backing to make it happen. I mean, as of right now, SoftBank's actual liquid capital stands at about $23 billion, which by my calculations is somewhat less than $1 trillion. They just raised a little bit more money by selling off part of T-Mobile. They do have over $100 billion in net assets, but not all of that is liquid. And a lot of that is tied up in their ownership of ARM, the chip company. Now, the interesting thing about this story is that according to the rumors, and again, this is all rumors. We don't know where it is. We don't know what it is. We don't know how it would be formed. The rumor says it's in Arizona. Okay. Where? According to the rumors, the way that they would make this happen, that's the interesting part. They would make it happen the same way that we do infrastructure projects in the U.S. by introducing and selling municipal bonds to fund this. Now, that is an interesting aspect. And so if you combine the fact that essentially this is a company that's out there saying what the administration wants to hear and then asking for municipal bonds, suddenly this thing might be a little more real, because that's something that the administration has the power to perhaps bring to reality. And that would be a way to make this thing happen. But as JP says, it's probably that this would be a very, very automated system. It would not provide a huge number of jobs. What it would do is bring some sort of manufacturing of some sort of something here in the U.S., and that would appeal to the administration's demands to reshore production. So I imagine that all of this is going to be very attractive to Washington. All of it is going to create a lot of economic activity that SoftBank can take advantage of. I don't know what real benefits it's going to create, if any, if it's really going to come to fruition.
I want to say just one thing about the location of Arizona, which is so interesting for this project, because we'll talk more about water in the next block, but specifically when it comes to this process, the amount of pure water that would be needed to do intermittent cleanings, throughout this production process is immense. Arizona is facing an ongoing drought, and it's obviously water is an issue. So it's just interesting to me that's where they chose to do it.
Desalinization. But
I do like Stephen's representation of this is what the Trump administration wants to hear. It's very much like telling him how wonderful he is. Oh, trillion. All you have to mention is the magic word, $1 trillion. $1 trillion.
Well, no, JP, a trillion here, a trillion there. Before you know it, you're talking about real money. But guys, let's look at this. A couple of different aspects. Number one, as someone mentioned, this is not a new concept. This has been done in China, right? Shenzhen has this AI robotic kind of thing. And in some ways...
but a lot of their manufacturers are not actually robots. They're actually people.
I think that was true. It's becoming less true every day. I think when you go to their most modern factories and everything else, they're using robotics, Stephen. Let's not kid ourselves or fool ourselves into thinking they're not. But here's the point. A project like this doesn't get done in a month or even a year. This is a multi-year project where you need to invest that $1 trillion over 5 years, 10 years, 7 years. And you got to understand, you may not see the benefits, you may not reap the benefits for 7 to 10 years. And when you're running a centrally managed economy, such as the Chinese Communist Party runs, you can afford to make those kinds of bets because you don't worry about your stock, you don't worry about the consumer price index. You don't worry about a lot of things we worry about here in the West and in a capitalist society. And so they may be better suited to do this maybe kind of project. But as Don Barzini in Godfather Part 2 says, after all, we are not communists. Okay, so we have the ability to do things maybe not that kind of 10-year out scope. But Stephen, I think you're right. You're onto something with municipal bonds. Those would be tax-free municipal bonds at a locality, not necessarily at the federal level. And that could be something, Bonnie, to your point, I don't know if Arizona is the right place. What is the best place to build data centers and research for these kinds of things? We've got an article in Techstrong IT on it.
Yeah, it's supposed to be North Dakota,
Yeah,
right?
natural cooling.
Could be any of them. But here's,
I would
hold
point
on,
out
Mike.
this
I
is-
want to point out one
Sorry.
other thing. The notion that you're going to have all these foreign companies come in and do it. Hey, let's be clear. In the U.S., bring your money. Leave the people out there, but bring your money, right? But the whole thing that we've been talking about with sovereign IT runs against that. The same way, why would foreign companies want to put that payload, that capital, into American projects that could be nationalized or that they could be shut out of or they could be tariffed on or these other things? And ultimately, that could be what winds up killing this, because I don't know if we could do this without foreign companies.
I think this is going to be great for Arizona tourism because right after you go to see Tombstone, the town that was too tough to die, you can go over and visit the AI ghost town that's going to be there in about 5 years.
Very cool. With the dinosaurs.
Well, what I also think that, when you talk about Arizona, and I understand the water issue, definitely. I mean, Colorado, and they like our Colorado River, so do a lot of other states. But, they have a trending there of developing manufacturing. And they also have, with that, they also have the college educated people that are that they're building that strength. So when you're looking at the placement, you're looking at, yes, I'm looking at, the who's going to put the money in, and Arizona has been embracing these type of build outs. They want to see that and grow there.
No, look, they built out Phoenix.
Right.
And
and they're looking at, and they've been pretty wise about how they use the water. They've got, much like Vegas, they have developed systems for water management, and maybe not all the purification, because I'm not up to snuff on that kind of that area. But then you also look at, one of the beauties of Arizona is they're pretty well disaster free. They don't have earthquakes,
hurricanes.
They don't have hurricanes,
Dust storms.
No, they don't have any of those. So
They don't have fires. There's nothing to burn.
right.
They,
And in
they
fact,
they do have big sandstorms, though. That's,
yeah, but it's there's unless one of the dams broke, Meade or Lake Powell, the water, there's not going to be there's no real there. So all of those things make it a positive place to go. And that is, the weather is decent if outside of May through September, I think. So you can attract
Or it's
people.
kind of hotter than hell.
Yeah.
All right. Well, this message was brought to you by the Arizona Board of Commerce.
There you
Yes.
go.
there you go.
Well,
I
part
think
of this is because I worked with a company that I did a turnaround with a company that was a colo, MSP kind of company, and one of the big pitches we had was going to California and tell them, relook your data center, your stuff into Arizona, because we don't have earthquakes. And we did. We managed DR sites, for people in. This is many years ago.
Remains to be seen if water-cooled data centers would be quite as attractive there.
Purified water.
Mike, you had a point, and then we got to wrap this one up.
This project is so important it can't go to Arizona. It needs to be right outside Mar-a-Lago, where the president can keep an eye on it.
You think so, with the hurricanes?
Yeah, because we have a large college-educated group down here. Okay, on that note, let's take a break. As I said, this segment was brought to you by the Arizona Chamber of Commerce. If you're looking to relocate, speak to Kimberly. We'll be back here in Techstrong Gang. We're going to talk a little bit about it, staying on point, AI water crisis. Stay tuned.
Discover Techstrong Group, the epicenter of tech innovation. We're your go-to for reaching IT leaders and practitioners worldwide. Our secret? Impactful content that sparks awareness, engagement, and top-quality leads. With us, you'll access editorial websites, streaming videos, virtual events, custom content, analyst research, and more. Join our satisfied clients. Let's revolutionize your tech journey. Contact us today and tell your story to the world in the most powerful way with Techstrong Group.
Welcome back to the Techstrong Gang. Well, we've been talking about AI, and we even talked a little bit about water, but for water utilities, AI is only one of the issues that they're facing. There's been a rising threat of cyber attacks, especially last year in 2024 for large and small utilities. New research shows that these two dual challenges are really posing a problem for water utilities in the short term and in their long-term planning. Let's take a look.
Water utilities are facing a dual challenge: the rise of digital threats along with surging demand. As AI reshapes infrastructure needs, these compounding pressures are reflected in Black & Veatch's 2025 water report, which finds that 95% of utilities now list cybersecurity as a critical investment priority. There's been a sharp rise in cyber attacks on water systems. Last year, cyber incidents targeted both small and large providers, according to the U.S. intelligence community. But it's not just attacks disrupting operations. A single 100 megawatt data center can consume up to 2 million liters of water per day, equivalent to the daily water needs of over 6,000 homes. When it comes to quantifying the future water needs of AI, research shows that water utilities grapple with uncertainty in long-term planning. That's because data centers' size and locations depend on private decisions. Cooling needs also vary based on hardware, climate, and designs that companies rarely disclose. Success will depend not only on resilience, but also on clear cybersecurity protocols, coordination with data centers, and infrastructure planning that accounts for evolving water needs.
You know, it's interesting. We talk a lot about the grid and the surge that AI is going to have on demand, but water is also crucial, as we were just discussing, because sometimes it's not just water, but it's also purified water, which might mean more water to produce for these facilities. So I think that there's a big question mark looking forward for these utilities.
Absolutely, Bonnie. And back to our first block about potential critical infrastructure. There was that attack on the water system. Was it in New York or somewhere in the Northeast? Potential attack on a water system. Our water is probably one of the most vulnerable of our critical infrastructure delivery systems. I don't want to even say anything to give people ideas out there, but it's scary when you think about it.
So, Monty, where is the water going to come from? Because having visited places like Arizona, water is a ongoing debate, and there's fights over who owns the Colorado River, and people are trying to redirect the river, and Southern California wants it to grow almonds and all kinds of stuff. But there's only so much water, so where's it going to come from?
That's a great question. I think a lot of it is looking towards the climate tech solutions that I often talk about and ways of creating more opportunities for water. But once you start getting into those political battles, that is a tricky one, and I don't have the answer for that. But the water utilities themselves are not only dealing with that, but with this rising threat of cyber attacks, it's a lot for them to take on, plus the regulations. So it's something to keep watch on, especially as we keep talking about new data construction, for data centers.
Well, it's not just new data centers, it's water-cooled data centers. Yeah. You could know these AI data centers that are being built cannot be cooled by air alone. And so the water demands there become exorbitant. Look to Israel, look to Saudi Arabia, companies that have put a lot of money into desalination technologies, especially when you talk about non-potable type of water uses, such as in an AI data center. I believe, necessity is the mother of invention, and politics isn't the answer here. Technology is.
Well, that's an interesting aspect too, because Mr. Solar here, I got to say it. One of the nice uses of solar power, whether it's photovoltaic, solar electricity, or just heat, is desalination. And one of the reasons for that is because it's an asynchronous use or load. In other words, you don't really need batteries, because you could essentially run desal on whenever the sun is shining and just let it stop when the sun isn't shining, because the water will just sit there and wait to be used. So yeah, desalination actually works really, really well. There's been some really interesting approaches to this using barges, for example, with offshore water tanks. Also, water is nice because it is extremely, you can move it really easily. You can pump it in these magical devices called pipes that have been invented a little while ago. And you can store it in these incredible storage tanks called lakes. And all of these things are very appealing from an environmental perspective, but also because they solve a lot of problems.
Well, as the ice melts, right, we could actually use it.
It's a good thing we are shipping. It's a good thing we're shipping, billions of gallons of water around in plastic bottles because that really helps.
Well, one of the curious things, okay, so you're talking about water cooled, but we also talk about liquid cooled because there's other
Yeah,
liquid.
those are two different things. Yeah.
Right. And when I was at the HPC conference of supercomputing last year, I met with the CTO of Valvoline. They had a big, huge booth there. And the reason why I met with them is like, he asked for the meeting. And I'm like going, I'm game. What the heck is Valvoline doing here? And part of the premise of what they've been doing, they've been cooling engines forever. And, they have a lot of technology that's been involved with the F1s and everything else that goes along with specialized technology that they're applying to this market. So ingenuity, creativity, expansion, where do we go? And it's not just, yes, the lakes and that kind of thing, but we'll see what happens with, desalinization. So I think there's a lot there that U.S. has in terms of our creativity of how we tackle problems like this.
Absolutely. Interesting stuff. Great report, Bonnie.
Thank you.
Hey, we've got to pull the plug on this one. We're overtime. What a great Techstrong gang for this wonderful Tuesday. Who knows what we'll have for tomorrow, for Wednesday, but keep our fingers crossed that all is well in the world. We do have a full Techstrong TV lineup as usual following, so stay tuned for that. Just a quick mention. We are now doing Techstrong Gang Deconstructed on YouTube, and I believe on Techstrong TV and the OTT channel, where you don't have to watch all 3 blocks if that's not your thing, though why you wouldn't is beyond me. But if you just want to catch one of these blocks because you only have a short amount of time, take your pick, watch one now, watch one later, save one for tomorrow, but watch it. Until next time, this is Alan Schimmel on behalf of Bonnie and Mike and Kimberly and JP and, of course, Stephen Foskett. Have a great day, everyone. We're out. Hey everyone, we're back here on Techstrong TV. Couldn't wait to get this guy on. As soon as we announced what's going on at Futurum, I kind of immediately reached out and said, hey, we got to talk. Let me introduce you to Shai Bolor. Shai, welcome to Techstrong TV. Welcome to Futurum Group. Thanks for coming on here, man.
Thanks for having me, Alan. I'm super excited to start this new chapter in my life. Honestly, couldn't be a better partnership than Futurum, and I'm super happy to be here.
Very cool. So we're going to talk about Futurum Equities, which is this new business unit you're heading up there. But before we do, I wanted to kind of give people a sense of your story. Obviously, a big LA sports fan behind you there. But beyond that, give people, your journey and how you wound up being involved here in Futurum Equities.
Yeah, so it's an interesting one because I started my Twitter page just 2 years ago, Stock Savvy Shy, and my initial goal from that was to create a environment where I can communicate my thoughts. My whole career has been in corporate strategy, so I've worked in Fortune 500 companies in healthcare, entertainment, tech, and my whole job has always been digesting data, creating a narrative, and communicating it to the C-suite so they don't have to do the work. So I was like, all right, well, I feel like I've been a FinTwit follower. I go on Twitter for over 5 years ago to get my information on what to do with my investments. I saw that there was a niche missing there. It was either too much data vomit, too technical, or it was just hard on the eyes, there wasn't really a signal, any kind of messaging. And I was like, I think I could fit that little gap right there. Let me try it out. And also at the time, my girlfriend at the time, fiance now, she was sick of me talking about stocks, like completely. I was like, I kept telling her like, it was 2022. Every month I was like, it's going to bottom now, the market, the bubbles, it's going to burst. It bursted, it's going to bottom. So I used Twitter as essentially as Stocks Heavy Shy as like a great place to journal, share my charts that I create on my own, my Excel modeling, and then it just blossomed to something so much more. And I think a lot of times now where my account is I'm looking at right now 184,000 followers. I get over 50 million impressions a month. I just did not think it would blossom into this. And I just turned 32 this past weekend. So I actually did have somewhat of a every year, every birthday. I think it's very common for a lot of people that they reflect. It's a great time to close a chapter, begin a new one. And at this birthday was one I was really proud of to close that chapter because it got me reflecting, not just on where I am, but how I got here. I mean, this was supposed to be a side project for me. Just me, the love of research, and a belief that if I stayed focused long enough, that maybe, just maybe, something can come of it. And now I'm partnering up with an incredible company like Futrum. The reach, the platform that they offer, and the access that they have gave me the freedom to not be shackled to the W-2 life, corporate ladder, just the ability to turn my ideas into conversations and turn my momentum that I had on X and what I built for myself into a real opportunity. And I'm just super excited to be working alongside a great, incredible team with purpose, clarity, and honestly, zero ceiling. That's something I just have not experienced ever in my career. And I'm excited to see where I go next now at my 33rd birthday.
Wow. Well, first of all, man, happy birthday.
Thank
Good
you.
for you. That's a great thing, man. I think back at 32, I was doing crazy things still. But it was a different time. Anyway, I want to talk a little bit about Futurum Equities. We announced it when it was announced just last week. Exciting. It's kind of a new branch of the Futurum model, if you will. But for people out here maybe who didn't see the announcement or not familiar with Futurum Equities, how would you describe it, Shai?
Yeah, so it's a great question. I think the reason it's hard to describe because it doesn't exist out there, anything that's comparable. A lot of people think about the modern investor or just retail investor. You could call it dumb money if you want, but really they have been scoring a lot better than the smart money past couple of years. Either way, there's been a renaissance on where the volume of retail of investors are coming from. It's coming from retail. Unfortunately, though, the model hasn't been beneficial for retail. It's been a lot of crowdsourcing where, for me specifically, I was able to get into Palantir under $10, CrowdStrike under 100, Rock Lab under 5, IonQ under 10, etc. Mainly because I'm able to digest data and create a narrative, see what's noise and what's a signal due to my corporate experience. A lot of retail investors don't have that luxury. They don't have that time to gain those skill set. Like part of my journey when I started 5 years ago was Malcolm Gladwell, the Outlier book. I was like, if I put 10,000 hours in, I will feel comfortable being in the room for people who have been doing this for decades. So I put the time in. But even then, I stick my finger out and just see where the wind's blowing because I'm just guessing at this point. But for decades, institutional investors, they've been winning. And it wasn't because they're brighter than me. It wasn't because they're smarter than me. It was because they were closer to the data, to the decision makers, to the signals before they hit the tape or the earnings reports. And that's when retail saw it. So I was like, Daniel and I have been friends for a while and we've internet friends. And we were just we noticed that there was a gap missing on what the modern investor needed. Robinhood disrupted the whole brokerage business by creating 0% commission. And now every legacy broker followed suits. I think there's a disruption to be had on research, especially access to research. There's a high institutional wall right now attached to actual data and research that will move the needle on if it's a good investment, it's not a good investment, where the puck's heading. And I think we're at Futurum Equities are trying to close that gap with air. And by air, I mean access, insights, research. I think every investor, modern retail investor, needs air in order to catch up for the institutional whales out there. So that's the three pillars of the institutional edge that us at Futurum Equities are trying to build for the modern investor. And again, like, we're not doing it alone. We have some great partnerships, like in StockTwits. We have a daily rip morning show that and StockTwits is a platform that has 3 million active users daily to talk market. So as part of that partnership, we have that daily rip live show. And I do think that it's one of the most watched live financial shows because we get up to 10 to 12,000 daily viewers for that 1 hour every morning. So I think there was essentially a long-winded answer on, there was a gap out there on access and providing a signal of where the puck's heading. And right now, it's probably the first time in the stock market history we're experiencing multiple super cycles at the same time. AI, quantum, space, electrification, like, that's never been happened before. With all of these things are happening at once, and because of that, things are moving really quickly. And if you're a retail investor, like, you have a difficult time of what's noise and what's an actual signal. And we're trying to provide the guardrails for that to give the Futurum Daily signal on what people should focus on and what they should maybe, that's noise. Because unfortunately, 90% of the information out there is just noise, but it could really dictate your future livelihood based on what kind of investments you make today.
Yeah. You know, I really think that that's one of the biggest problems in civilization today is most people just can't separate signal from noise, whether it's financial information, political information, just daily news or anything else. You know, we went from having, 3 channels of TV to infinite numbers of channels of information. And a lot of people, they're all the same and they can't differentiate between them. So that is a problem today, separating signal from noise. You mentioned air. I want to reemphasize that. Access. What's AIR stand for? AIR.
Yeah, access, insights, research.
Yeah, access, insights, and research, right? And that's what Futurum Equities is bringing. Now, you mentioned the daily signal. I signed up for day one. But tell our audience, what is the Futurum Daily Signal?
Yeah, so if you guys aren't aware, on the institutional sides, there's usually some kind of institutional grade research note that gets sent out every morning. You probably have seen it with the Dan Ives out there, the Tom Lees. Like, essentially, there's so much news that happens every day that it's good to give a pulse check of, like, this is the big rock for today. For example, today, this morning's Futurum Daily Signal was about, is OpenAI going to be disrupting Palantir? Because OpenAI just landed a $200 million Department of Defense contract. And that's the first major, like, AI software contract since Palantir. So a lot of FUD was getting generated overnight of, like, does Palantir have a moat? Is that monopoly kind of cracking a bit with this OpenAI? And I was like, we have to send them a signal ASAP before this materializes into something that it isn't. And our ethos on this morning's note was, it's not. It's, to be honest, it's amplifying it, because what Palantir does is it makes all these LLMs operational. So when OpenAI lands these major deals, it's just providing the intelligence layer for the DoD, but it doesn't really provide the control layer. That control layer is what Palantir does, and nobody can do what Palantir does in that segment of what AI is going to be. So this is just noise. And that we went into deep depth on what that is, but every single morning we're creating a 500, 600 word thought of the day, daily, some signal of, like, what caused a ruckus that day of or day before that. We're trying to help guardrail you through that fog of FUD, essentially. And that's what we were aiming to do. And I'm glad you signed up. Hopefully you like it, maybe give some feedback, since we're only 2 weeks into it. So open to whatever narrative you want to tell us.
Actually,
about
I'm just
helping.
sucking it all in right now. But here's the great thing for people watching out there, right? It doesn't cost anything. This isn't up behind some broker wall, right? And anyone can sign up for this and get it in their email box every morning.
that was like the major component when Daniel and I are orchestrating what Futurum Equities was going to be. It was, we have to make this free because there's a real subscription exhaustion among retailers. Like a lot of people have just like, do I pay this, this? Like it started with streaming wars where like now I swear I pay more than what the cable bill was probably going to be back in the day. Now I have 8 different streams that I pay for. And the same thing for newsletter subscription. Like people like, in order to get that signal, like you have to pay up for it. And even then, it's really not much of a signal. That's why it's becoming disruptive. Where like we could probably monetize this pretty quickly right off the gates. We don't want to. That's not the purpose. We're truly trying to provide the signal for retail investors to play catch up and have a chance to have an apples to apples fight into this beautiful game of capitalism that we all love because we're participating in it to better ourselves. And we don't want to monetize that. We just don't. We're just really, truly trying to help out a lot of retail investors. And that's where we're following a similar ethos of what Robinhood did back in the day on disrupting the brokerage business. It's very 1A, 1B.
Absolutely. Hey, just real quick before I forget, for people who do want to sign up for it, where do they go?
FuturumEquities.com. We also have our Twitter page, Futurum Equities. It is a Twitter account that we post in every single day about like specific one-liners on stocks that we love. We also just last week created a Futurum AI 15 list on non-Max 7 names that we believe are early disruptors in what they do, because guess what? AI is not just big tech semiconductors or NVIDIA. There's a lot of companies under the lower in the stack that will be massive disruptors, the Palantirs of the world. So we set out that list last week, got great feedback. We've gone on TV, talked about it a couple times, and it's getting some traction. And yeah, we create these kind of lists on a monthly basis on top of the daily signals every morning. So yeah, check Twitter accounts, sign up for that free app. It's not going to hurt you. And the worst thing is just another email in your inbox. But I really do hope that people take 1 to 2 minutes every day just to read up on it, because it keeps you on your toes.
And it's futurumequities.com. Yes?
Yes, futurumequities.com.
All right, just want to make sure we get that right. Shai, I don't want to take up too much of your time, but man, I'm excited. Everyone at Futurum is excited about to see where this goes, because there's another element. We don't have time to maybe jump into it today, but that is marrying retail investor needs to the needs of the typical Futurum customer, which are large tech companies, whether public, venture-backed, what have you. But what you find is information is the global currency. Right? And the same information that retail investor needs is the same information that the chief strategy officer at public tech company needs, right? They want to know what's going on and what's the big story and how do they separate the noise from signal. So though it may on its surface seem like, well, that's really a B2C play and there's a B2B play, the fact of the matter is what underlies them both is information. Right, the advisory services, and so that's where I think rubber meets the road here, and it's going to be really, really cool to watch and see how this takes off. One feeds the other.
Yeah, totally. I'm very excited, and we're just getting started. I'm sure that when we succeed, others will follow suit, and that institutional wall will get taken down. Like bring down that wall. It's going to be a good thing.
I remember that. All right, man. Hey, Shai, welcome to the family. Keep up the great work. Looking forward to hearing more and seeing more of what you guys got going on at Futurum Equities. Thank you.
Thanks for having me on.
All right, we're going to take a break here on Techstrong TV. We're going to be back in a minute. We've got a lot more, but hey, remember, go check out futurumequities.com. Sign up for the Daily Signal newsletter. As a lot of other research, all free for you.
Hey guys, thanks for the throw. We're here with Rinky Sethi, who's newly appointed Chief Security Officer for Upwind, and we're going to have a little chat about what's going on with cloud security. Rinky, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Michael.
You've been around the block a couple of times. From your resume, it appears that you've been at Twitter and a few other places over the years. From your perspective right now, it seems like we're having some sort of seminal moment here in the transition in cloud security, but what's going on and what attracted you to joining the company?
I just joined Upwind Security. It's been about 4 months. And it's interesting. I met Upwind back in 2022 when they were just getting started. And it was the very first time that I had heard the word runtime security. And I thought it was going to be another buzzword or something like that. And it was when the CEO, Amiram, had shared with me, like, Rinky, you can't do security right unless you're in runtime. And up till that point, like a lot of cloud security, I feel was driven because of compliance requirements that you needed to have in the cloud, that you need to make sure that you have some kind of tooling that's going to ensure that your configurations are right, that you're getting the right kind of reporting out of it. And you were still seeing that there were massive attacks happening in the cloud. And now having gone through many, many cloud cloud transformations at companies, it becomes really noisy as you're implementing tools, and yet you're still not able to catch the attacks as they're happening. And I became a true believer of you can't get security right unless it's at runtime, unless you have something in runtime. You need to understand what is happening within your applications at real time. And so I heard this the first time back in 2022, kind of followed the company and followed the product. One of the products that we were using at the time ended up getting acquired by another company. The quality went down and it was time for us to go do a POC and look at different solutions. And so, of course, Upwind was in the running in addition to a lot of other products, and the tech just blew me away. And when the opportunity came to join the company to help them build, it was a no-brainer. And so here I am. And I think cloud security is shifting quite a bit, and you have to be there in runtime. And I think when we think about what's going to happen with AI being introduced and kind of this future where we're going to have agents talking to agents within the security vertical, you are going to be reliant and be absolutely dependent on having tooling and runtime to be able to have then those agents have access to that to be able to make better decisions.
It also seems that cloud security environments are getting more complex. We're seeing so-called cloud native technologies, containers and Kubernetes alongside virtual machines and serverless and who knows what else is in there. And to your point, now we'll see AI workloads. Have we reached some sort of inflection point here where the complexity is just greater than what our legacy platforms can keep up with?
It's so true. And when we think about like securing cloud native AI workloads, and like you said, it's like, how do you secure containers and data pipelines and models? And then how do you be like, how are you dynamic in terms of ensuring that you have monitoring of your runtime behavior? And so it's security to a whole different level, and environments are becoming highly complex. And just because you have these ephemeral systems or that you have these instances that are coming up and down, it doesn't mean that you just ignore security around them, because we've seen time and time again that the attacks are still happening, and they're able, since the attackers are now leveraging AI and have more complexity in what they're able to leverage, they're able to then get in really quickly, learn your environment quickly, and behave accordingly.
One of the things about Upwind is it's an early adopter of this transition to eBPF, which is kind of core to the whole runtime story. How much of that eBPF is out there? Because as I understand it, it requires kind of the latest versions of Linux, and maybe we'll see it on Windows one day soon. But where does that fit in the overall strategy?
I think Upwind was really in fact, I had not heard about eBPF until I met Upwind, and Upwind was a really early adopter of eBPF, using it to deliver like really, really deep runtime visibility without trading off any kind of performance or context. It actually made it such that they could build these sensors that were extremely lightweight. And so I think it's like super, and then, you saw like after that, more companies started leveraging eBPF to build their tech, and it kind of now has become a little bit of a buzzword, but really it's kind of changed the way that sensors behave, like how they do system calls, and how they just monitor container behavior in real time. And it's really changed kind of uh, how agents work, because agents and sensors had like a very, it's almost a bad word with security practitioners because of the heavyweight nature of it. But with eBPF, it's just it's changed the way that sensors behave. And I'm a true believer that you do need to have sensors or agents in your infrastructure to have full context. And even though that's like a hurdle sometimes to get through with engineering teams, because you are sitting in their production environment. So I think like this is kind of a game changer.
We've been debating this whole thing around application security now with a hard tilt towards the notion of shifting left and maybe getting developers to take more responsibility for application security. But I can't help but wonder how practical that really is. So, what's your take on this whole shift left versus shift right kind of conversation that we're trying to have these days?
I think you need a little bit of I like it's hard for me because like shifting left is always been like important, even when we're thinking about things like cloud security. It's like how do you get closer to DevOps, to how do you get closer to engineers to do the right things up front? How do you actually make it easier such that it's kind of like just built into security is built into the infrastructure and security is baked in. And so we've been working really hard at that, pushing developers to take on more security responsibility earlier in the life cycle. But without the right tools and support, we've seen that like this can really backfire too. And so to me, I think like it's not optional. We do still have to we still do have to shift left. But you can't like just dump security onto engineering without guardrails. So I think that's really important. But then on the shift right side too, it gives you context. And so you're shifting left, you're giving more to developers, more tooling to make sure that you're thinking about security, but then you still want to be scanning and doing the right things on the right side. So I don't think it's like, and it's like, remember back in the day where it was like, it's prevention versus detection. And then we started going back to, well, detection is a form of prevention actually. And so like, it's not one or the other. I do really think you have to think about both.
One of the other things that's also come up is how much authority should security people be given to fix vulnerabilities? Because developers will argue, well, we should fix the vulnerability because you might break things. However, the developers will then say, we don't have time to actually fix the vulnerability. So, is there a role for security people to be more proactive about taking responsibility for maybe fixing some of the vulnerabilities without any help from a developer?
It's funny because it really depends on where I think security teams sit and what the accountability levels are. And so if you have and again, we have like division of access for a reason, right? And so if you're now going to have the security teams that are governing the systems also have access to fix it, is that going to be the right separation of duties that you need? That's question number 1 for me. But also, I think a lot of times security teams don't have, we're doing the scanning. We know we can even provide them now with AI products. We can provide back to the developers that have access to that infrastructure and system. And here's exactly what you need to do to fix this. A lot of the tooling actually they have the capabilities to auto remediate, and nobody wants to do it. So like, can security teams just press a button and say, go fix it? And then who's responsible if the infrastructure falls down as a result because there wasn't proper testing and things that were done? And so I think there is a process and a lot of change control that goes into remediation. And that's why it takes companies so long sometimes to fix some of these vulnerabilities, is because you need to test it in the right way. If something falls over, you need to go fix those issues before you go fix the vulnerability. And so, I mean, can teams do it? Sure. But then is your infrastructure so resilient, and is it built in a way that it's not going to fall over? So I do think there's a maturity that needs to happen. And I hope we move to this world where, yeah, like we just press a button and things can remediate.
So, what's your best advice to organizations as they kind of look at all of this in the age of cloud security? Because even 10 years on, I feel like they're still struggling. A lot of them, it's not even the tech, it's the processes that seem to be different. And they're trying to move things that they did on premise into the cloud, but it doesn't really work. So, how do I get to something that feels like truly cloud secure because people still list as their top number one issue for not moving the cloud security.
Yeah, I think that when you're thinking about cloud security, you do have to bring a different mindset, right? Completely, because you're now putting like the spin up of infrastructure in your developers' hands. It's no longer the same way that we used to architect applications. And so you do have to think about just security in a completely different way. Um, I think that the number one thing that you want to focus on, yes, you build things with guardrails and you kind of set the right standards, but at the end of the day, you have to be in runtime. It's why I'm at Upwind right now, is because they're the ones that focus on runtime first. And it was a hard decision at the time to make, right? Because you still do have to solve for regulatory requirements and compliance. You do have to have the posture management piece, which all the products have now, but it's the runtime security piece of it, I think, is focused on like where the attacks are happening. And I think like from there, build out your program around cloud security. This is the only way I think we're going to stay ahead. It's the thought leadership and like how people are thinking about this needs to change. There's still, I think, this is why I love being here too, because I think there's still a lot of education that needs to happen around what is runtime? Why do you need to care about what's happening right now, right this second in your infrastructure? And so I think that's a really, really important piece. And then like what we talked about earlier, I actually like the way you asked the question too. I think it's a shift left plus shift right. When you stop having the verses, it's like you do need to think about end to end how you're securing your cloud.
Is there something security people should be doing about having a conversation with software development teams about security that will change their mindset? Because a lot of times they're like, well, security is A, maybe somebody else's job. B, I'm in a hurry. I got to do all this thing. C, you send me a bunch of vulnerabilities to go fix. I go look for them. And turns out they're not running in memory or the application's not internet facing. And there's this tension that exists between developers and security people and has been there for a long time. How do we kind of get beyond that?
We have to reframe security as a dev, like this is a dev problem. And that you have to secure code when it's being written, not weeks later, not to review, not post breach. I think you have to make it personal as well. And what I mean by make it personal is like, I think if you just say, oh, look, like that company was breached or this is what happened, like they'll be like, oh, yeah, but we're better than that. And so the best way to do this is bring the data to them, like do a red team attack and show them how easy it was to get into the code, like into to have an attack or to have a breach, or show them that a data exposure that can happen with the code that they've written or the infrastructure that they've stood up. And I think then it's like, oh my gosh. And it's like, how long did that take? And it's like 5 minutes from a red teamer, or that you found it through a pen testing. Because a lot of times we do these pen tests, then we look at all the issues, we file tickets and have people fix them. There's a missed opportunity there on saying like, if this was done by an attacker, like going and driving the education on what could have happened to the company and why this could have been prevented so easily. And so I think winning the hearts and minds of a developer starts with kind of like show them what an attacker could have done with the work that they've done. Actually, it's interesting you asked that, because like right out of college, I was trying to find my passion into cyber. And it was exactly that. I was a developer. I was a computer science engineer. And I was like, I can't figure out why I'm in cybersecurity. And where I found it was one of my first roles was to go and train developers on cybersecurity. And I realized like reading the OWASP top 10 to them wasn't resonating. Their eyes were glazing over. And it was like, how do we teach security and win the hearts and minds of developers early on to understand? And I brought a company in that was like thinking about that differently at the time, on saying like, let's just have them hands on, teach them how to hack and like teach them how to like break their own stuff. And it immediately people were like, oh my gosh, I get it. Right.
Can we have a unified approach to cloud security? Because a lot of folks are convinced that each of these platforms are fundamentally different. And I can't really translate the things that I know for Google over to Amazon and vice versa. Or can we really centralize this? Because there's people out there who are dubious.
Ideally, I wish we could centralize it. And I think that a lot of companies are working towards like building a platform that can give you basically give you the same thing that you would see in GCP or AWS or your on-prem environment. Unfortunately, we're hearing about like some of these companies being acquired by other large companies, and there's a question on, is it going to be like, are they going to bias more heavily towards that particular cloud? I do think there's, like right now, tools are fragmented, right? And so you have like all these acronyms, CNAP and CSPM and CM or DSPM. And every company is trying to say, like, let's try to build this into one platform. I know, like, Upwind, we have a platform that covers everything. And I think it's like really important. Again, like Upwind started with runtime security, and realized very quickly we need to go build CSPM. We need to go understand identities across workloads and data and network. And without that, people are going to have all these fragmented solutions, which is what exists today. And so now companies are trying to say, like, we have to build this into one product so that companies don't operate this way. And I know as a practitioner how I had to have it, that I cared about runtime security. I went with Upwind. I needed other products to like help really kind of scale out. And then now you're like stitching products together to understand your security posture. And that's actually why I joined Upwind, is because I want to like change this dynamic with customers, and like, how do we really go and build the platform that people need or security leaders need, where it is one platform, because I think it is chaos today.
What's that one thing you see organizations still doing out there that from a cybersecurity professional perspective just makes you shake your head and go, folks, we need to be better than that?
When AI, I forget, it was like early last year. It's been a while now, but like it was like the start of everybody talking about AI. And then every security leader was like freaking out, including myself. And you're like, okay, they're going to ask me what we need to do around safety and security. And then the buzzwords came out, like every security vendor came out and like was using security LLMs, and like, oh, here's how we're doing like AI security. And it's like, wait, are you solving for security using AI? Are you solving AI security? What is going on? Is this LLM? Like, and there was all these questions, and you saw these like security leaders that went and like bought these niche solutions and made some vendors like really, really successful. And then you realize like that's actually a feature in a product. And I think this is why the chaos exists. We as security leaders need to go and like push to actually have products that are solving big problems. Otherwise, we have these chaotic environments where, oh, now we have this feature, somebody else is building it into their platform. And we're just like creating this environment then that like needs to be stitched together. And I think that things are changing quite rapidly. And I would say like one thing we need to look at as security leaders, and is that let's relook at our programs completely today, such that like, how is AI going to impact what the future of this team looks like? Because we want our practitioners to make sure that they are going to have incredible roles and careers in the new AI world. And that are we making sure that we're investing in the right tech and then in the right training and skills for our teams? Because I think everything's going to change in the future here.
All right, folks, you heard it here. There's more change than ever in the land of cloud security, and for that matter, security in general. The only issue is how proactive are you going to be about responding to it? Hey, Rinky, thanks for being on the show.
Michael, thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
All right, and back to you guys in the studio.
In the world of high-stakes data protection, security is paramount, and there's no more secure system than one that's air-gapped. But what does air-gapped mean? And are we changing the definition of the way the word is used? In this episode of the Tech Field Day podcast, virtual networks are air-gapped. Welcome to the Tech Field Day podcast, where each episode we bring together a group of experts from across the enterprise IT space to discuss a single topic or a premise related to enterprise IT. The Tech Field Day podcast is often recorded in association with one of our Tech Field Day events. This week we're at Networking Field Day. Tech Field Day is a part of the Future Room Group, and we are excited to be bringing you some of the brightest folks in the IT industry. I'd like to take a moment for our panelists to introduce themselves before we jump into today's episode.
Hi, I'm Carol Warner-Reese. I've been in networking for 30-some years and happy to be here.
I'm Jason Ginner, been in networking for about 20-some years and also very happy to be here.
John Osmond, consultant from Albuquerque, New Mexico. Most of the work I'm doing right now is working to the state office of broadband, and I've been doing this type of stuff for nigh 30 years or so.
My name is Tom Hollingsworth, and I'm a practice lead for Tech Field Day here at the Future Room Group. Let's jump into the premise for today's episode. It's an iconic movie scene, an aging movie star dangling from a rig attached to the ceiling, trying to hack into an unhackable computer with lights and sensors everywhere. The Black Vault at Langley is the most air-gapped system we have ever seen on a movie or TV set. But today, I'll just put it in a different VLAN and nobody will be able to get to it, right? This episode, we're going to unpack whether or not air-gapped networks, we are going to unpack whether or not virtual networks are air-gapped networks. And the reason why we brought that up is because during this event here at Networking Field Day, we had a number of companies who told us that their solution was air-gapped, which created some problematic questions from the delegates because they're like, well, what do you mean? Like, it's completely isolated, right? Like, I have to walk over with a floppy disk in order to upload information, and there's an armed guard with poison curare darts that will shoot me if I don't have the right passphrase of the day and that I don't match my photo. And everyone's like, no, we're just sending the traffic down a different wire. Like, that's air-gapped, right? So I'm gonna open this up to my panelists here because I'm sure that they have a strong opinion about this. Why can't a network be air-gapped as long as the traffic channels are just separated?
I think the term itself, air-gapped, implies there's air in between. You know, it's a physically separate environment, not just virtually separate.
You've been buying those vacuum-sealed Cat5 cables because there's air in those things.
Very true. I just feel as though the term implies a degree of security where there's a physical isolation from the other things that it could result in exposure from breach. So I think a virtual environment doesn't really. I don't think it meets that criteria.
Well, I'm not sure. There are some instances where you can use virtual networks and have air gaps. So if the routing process doesn't know how to get to a subnet, if you can't get to the network from, say, the enterprise has a storage network that they don't want anyone to reach, and if you can't get there from anywhere in the network, then it is air-gapped, even if it's on the same infrastructure.
I just think go back to the days of EtherCap and things like that. You can confuse this equipment to actually let it drop things from each of these virtual contracts into another one. So I don't think we can actually say that an air gap is an air gap unless it physically has air in it.
I mean, my good friend John Pross, who was my Novell mage, was able to hide an entire Novell server on a network by changing Ethernet frame types. 4 workstations on the network could talk to that server. Yes, it was plugged into the network, but we considered that air-gapped because literally no one could talk to it if you weren't on one of those workstations. And it was because a principal was absolutely paranoid that one of the students was going to hack into the database to change their grades because I guess he watched Ferris Bueller's Day Off. So would you consider something like that where we do protocol trickery to hide things as being sufficiently air-gapped? Or do we actually need to unplug the machine and run it across the room to isolate it?
I think there's so many other terms for virtualization of network. We've got VRFs. I mean, you mentioned VLANs. I think that there's already terms for that level of separation. And again, I feel like air gap implies a physical separation, a secure environment, a physically secure environment for that.
Then why do we keep using the term? Because I feel like isolated or secured or those words are way better to describe what we're offering. Why are we so hung up on air gapped?
So when I was talking about the air gap storage network, it's truly a isolated storage gap. I use the term wrong. And I think it's because a lot of terms sometimes are sexy or current, or we want to say. Right. And so when a vendor gets up and says, we are air gapped, and then shows connections to the clouds and connections into the internet and connections from here and there and here and back to them, it's like, yeah, no, that's not air gap. And so there's a kind of a definition, and like in a car, there's a firewall, there's a space between the engine and the compartment where people sit. And that's an air gap. And we expect the sort of same thing in a network. And so a real air gap is a separation. You can't get between the two. It's sort of a DMZ.
All of these separations, we're networking. We've been doing these things for years and years. It's all tunneling of some type. I don't care if it's a different frame encapsulation on a Novell network. 2 secure shell sessions from one person's laptop to the same router. Do you call that air gapped? connections because I mean I've got two connections that don't run on top of each other. I think that when you want to look at it that way, I'll change my mind. That's air gapped. I mean you've got the ability to keep things away from each other. We've got separate channels. There's no way for things to bleed through them.
So a lot of it too is level of risk you're willing to accept. So what's my definition of air gap depends on who my customer is or who's trying to get an air gap. So what do you need an air gap? When you say you want an air gap and they might come and say, I want an air gap, says, do you want this? Do you want no way ever anyone could get between things, even me when I'm built your network? So if you want it so that the person who designed your network can't get to some other piece on your network without walking to another room, that's a true air gap. But if you want to say, well, you're an exception. It's okay if this, under these circumstances, that can happen. So you have to really sort of define, what do you want? What level of air gap do you mean? Is it close? Is it like a centimeter, a millimeter, a yard?
What about the folks that are, the always theoretical, and I don't think it's theoretical anymore, the attack where you actually use air as the medium and you actually use sound to transmit things. At that point, even an air gap isn't sufficient for these types of things. It's how do you build these channels and what modalities are there for them to actually move information from one place to another, and how, is it tunneled there? Is it tunneled here? Where is the wrapping mechanism to get the data from one point to another? And what is it? What physical medium? What protocol medium? Things of those nature.
Well, I guess the question then comes up, if we're building these ridiculously ultra secure networks, who needs them? Like that's the thing. If you give me enough money and enough resources, I can make a network so secure nobody will ever be able to get into it.
You might as well turn it off.
And that's usually what we end up saying is the only way this computer can be more secure is if you only power it on to do certain things with it. But then that comes back to, well, how useful is that system? And what kind of data are you storing on there that can never be observed by another human being who isn't like hooked into the Borg hive mind? I mean, we know that the ultimate answer is going to be someone in the Department of Defense who has secrets that are so secret that if I even knew they existed, let alone what they were, my brain would explode into 1,000 pieces, right? I don't know that outside of maybe 3 things, there's any data that is that secure.
Well, it's not secure, but it's valuable. And so if I come up with a next AI algorithm that's going to, someone's example this week, create a ton of fertilizer for a penny, and then just sort of change the world, change the market thinks, that information is totally very important to someone.
Right.
And so that information I might want to protect because I have a vested interest in it. I built it. I can monetize it. I can make a lot of money, or I want to change the world and feed people, hungry people everywhere. And there will be actors that don't want that getting out. So it's sort of how valuable is the information? It's not necessarily just security information that has to be separated and isolated. It's just intrinsically valuable information. Mainly,
it comes to value, whether it's intelligence or if it has monetary value. And then the piece that I start thinking about on this is, what are the mechanisms you use to keep these things apart? Is it, is encryption is there a way to do air gapping? Can you actually say this thing is encrypted from this point to that point? So we've effectively got an air gap that no one can get into this for a given amount of time.
So what about quantum encryption, which we were talking about earlier this week? Can we use quantum encryption where if someone tries to listen and it changes the data so they know it's an alarm and it's there? I mean, do we need that?
Well, but I think you guys are kind of, you're moving past an obvious problem here. John, you bring up a good point. Yes, this system needs to be air gapped so nobody ever can touch it. You enabled file vault, right? You've enabled login challenges. You've disabled all of the USB ports. My good friend Edward Haletke just pours super glue into the USB ports on his systems so that nobody can ever access them. You've made it so that there's sound deadening equipment so nobody can analyze your keystrokes to figure out your password. The monitors all have those polarizing grills so that you can only see them when you're dead on, right? I've just named off a whole bunch of things that will infinitely raise the security of your network without having to isolate that machine. But what's the first thing that everybody wants to go to? Oh, this has to be air gapped. Think about the number of laptops that are currently running a program that if they're out of contact from a main control server for more than a week, they automatically wipe. To me, that's just as secure as having an air gap system. Because if I'm not checking in regularly, data's gone. but yet we get back to Tom Cruise dangling from the ceiling, trying to hack the knock list out of a Packard Bell 486.
You just said hack. How has the word hacker changed throughout the years from somebody that was clever and doing something neat to something that was kind of nefarious? So is air gap going to change so that it's not talking about a physical air gap between things, or is it some construct that we build that stops the immediate passing of data?
And the irony is that the original hacker, Captain Crunch, whistled DTMF tones in through the air into a phone receiver to hack long distance. So not even a phone receiver is safe from hacking. But you're right. What we have gone from is people who are investigating technology to understand how it works and make it work better, to individuals who want to be famous and deface things, to now like highly commercialized nation-state backed criminal gangs that are they're rifling through executive emails, trying to uncover new product releases. They're getting into Business Newswire, PR Newswire databases the day before something happens, so they can make money off the stock, so that they can turn it into Bitcoin, so that they can then back a nation-state government that's isolated from the world by sanctions and things like that. That's a long way from a whistle and a box of cereal. So in a world where we think that as long as we unplug the machine from the network, we're safe, is it even possible that that's not enough anymore?
You still have to worry about EMF, and you might have to be in a enclosed space.
A SCIF, a secure compartmentalized information center, where basically it's shock isolated and surrounded on all sides by deadening equipment, and you can't bring your phone in there, although we've seen pictures of members of Congress who just love to bring their phones into SCIFs, and the intelligence people who roll their eyes because you're not supposed to do that. And that was actually one of the things that I was thinking about was when you look at a lot of the way that information has been disseminated from supposedly secret systems as of late, you're right. This paper is colored fuchsia and has stripes all over it that says "do not copy." And then I reach into my pocket and I grab the greatest, little Minox camera that ever existed, and and then I can upload it to my iCloud account. So we've already found ways to get past that. I mean, look at someone like Edward Snowden or Chelsea Manning, who basically plugged their iPod into their computer at work and was able to download files, because it turns out iPods can store PDFs just as well as they store MP3s. And they were able to sneak a lot of information out there. And that system, for all we know, could have been air-gapped. So are we overblowing this? Are we holding companies to a standard that is unrealistic by saying you can't call it air-gapped unless there's air in the middle, when what we're really saying is you should change the terminology to refer to it as an isolated system, or change it to a compartmentalized system?
Yeah, I think it's become an overused and maybe nebulous term.
Kind of like military-grade encryption.
Right. Yeah, like that.
Military intelligence.
Or cloud. Just nebulous could mean a bunch of different things to different people. And, I feel like in the modern context, the marketing teams have probably latched onto it to imply a certain degree of security. But it doesn't really, I don't really think it fits the original context it was meant to have.
Yeah, so maybe it's sort of, we need to hold the vendors or the people who say, my system is air-gapped, a little more accountable, and say, I accept when you say my system is isolated, my system can be secured, my system is this. But when you say air-gap, and I look up the dictionary, what does air-gap mean? I expect isolation. And physical isolation and no possible. And you can't just say, well, it's air-gap because the only people who can get to it are on your own site.
I would agree with you. Will you look up the word literally in the dictionary and tell me what it means?
No, because if I get up again, I'll break my mic.
Well, the thing is literally now, it literally means its own antonym, because we have redefined what the word literally means. It means something that actually happened, but also something that figuratively happened. I mean, let's be fair. The name of this podcast used to be something that in the entire tech industry said, oh, when I'm talking about something happening in a physical location, it's on premise. No, it's not. It's on premises. However, we have redefined terminology over the years, right? So why can't we just roll with that? What's the harm in letting them say that it's air-gapped? When we all really know that it's not really air-gapped, but we really can't change what they're wanting to say.
Maybe folks should just be wary of the term and really get more information about what that means to when they hear air-gapped. find out what precisely does that mean. Because again, I think that the term is a little too nebulous to assume anything. Or when you hear the term, a vendor says, my technology is air gapped, you just look at them in the face and say, you know how you tell when a vendor is lying? They move their lips. And when you say the word air gap in your lips, you're lying.
But at the same time, we're practitioners, right? Our job is to make all of the sales lies come true. No kidding. That's actually what one of my sales guys told me in my old career. How can we increase the security level of these systems that they say are air gapped to make them more air gapped like? How can we as networking and security professionals? I mean, I remember stories of snort sensors that had their transmit wires clipped so that they couldn't accidentally reveal their location to people that were trying to evade the IDS. I mean, it's a little extreme. I don't need to carry wire cutters, but like, what can we do to help make this a better place so that maybe it's not air gapped, but it's ultra secure?
That's going to come down to, do you want to do it at a physical layer? You just talked about clipping wires. I mean, conceivably, you could, if you knew where people were going, you could at a packet level route everything to a dead end in a black hole someplace so that only the traffic you want going to the right place. You can do the same thing at any level in the stack. And when, as I keep telling everybody, every single one we're doing is a tunnel of some type. It's an ASCII tunnel from, your keyboard into that router if you're secure shelled in. At some point in that tunneling point, you can circumvent the traffic you don't want to be moving to black hole or die or go someplace where it's being assimilated and watched in any of those pieces, so that you can keep track of it. And air gaps, is an air gap going to be something you want to look at the data, or do you just want to throw it away so that it can't be used at all? Because there's a lot of information that, the stuff you would normally throw away, knowing it exists is a very good, might be pertinent to you as well. So maybe air gapping isn't the right thing you want to do. Maybe it's, I want to corral the data I don't want so that I have it as an intelligence source.
And it might be just a discussion point. So if my customer comes to me and says, I got this technology because it can be air gapped, make it so. And I'll talk to them and say, okay, what do you mean by air gapped? How isolated do you want it? How much effort do you want to separate your information? How hard do you want it to be to upgrade your devices when new patches come in? How hard do you want it to be for anyone in the universe to reach it, anyone in your organization to reach it, anyone in a department to reach it? And it sort of will open discussions. So let's have some more discussions about what you want to say. So if the vendor might have told you it's air gap, yeah, it's possible I can make it air gap, but you will never use it. I could make it this, I could make it that. How will I make it so it works for whoever bought it?
So it's become a more general term that implies a high degree of security, but you should really dig into.
A potential for a high degree of security. Yeah. Although it could be air gapped, it doesn't have to be, and it might never be air gapped. And then when they say, oh, well, I bought it because it was cool, but I don't really want that. Well, all right, let's figure out this mess stuff you got, how we can build what you need.
As Tom pointed out, words change. We still dial our phones. How many people have had a dial on their phone for?
Well, I mean, think about password complexity requirements, right? Every CEO on the planet wants the highest degree of password complexity so that I can't get hacked until they have to change their password every 30 days. And it has to be 15 characters long with 4 special characters, no repeated characters, and no repeats of your password for the last 7 years. And then they immediately go turn it off.
Or network access control.
Yeah. I can't see the server anymore. Turn it off because I want to be able to see this, but you don't need to see that. ZTNA says you're not authorized to. Doesn't matter. I'm the boss. And that's usually where we start getting into those compromising situations, right? Is I've created a policy and everybody has to follow that policy except for me because I'm different and special. I can totally run as root on my own box. I know I'm not supposed to, but I know what I'm doing. How bad can it be? And we all know what happens at the end of that, because that, just like every other story, the reason why those things exist, the reason why those policies are in place is to prevent careless mistakes from becoming massive disasters. And, something as simple as accidentally publishing the wrong API key in a GitHub repo. And now all of a sudden you have a $12,000 AWS bill next month. Well, what if that API key was, I don't know, the IP address of a satellite imaging system that was flying over a terrorist camp in Africa. Now, the DoD knows how to prevent that from happening, but does, the contractor that just is getting paid $12 an hour to work on this stuff? I don't have a good answer for that. Words mean things, according to one of our great delegates, Justin Warren, and he's absolutely right. When we use a specific term to refer to some kind of a policy construct or physical security, we have to be sure that what we're doing is accurately describing the situation as it is. And look, you've been listening to the on-premise IT roundtable for years, so I will be the first person to argue with that. But sometimes we actually have to take a step back and ask what we're doing. And as I've said to a number of people, if you use a better term, an isolated network, a virtually isolated network, you're going to get the point across. But unfortunately, that's talking to tech people who are very critical of poor word choices. A lot of people who buy technology want to hear something cool, military grade, advanced, AI, quantum, you name it. Whether or not it actually is inconsequential. If it has the right buzzword, people are going to buy it. And so the next time someone comes into your office and starts talking about air gapping something, my recommendation is to hook them up to a harness and dangle them into your server room. And if they can actually manage to hack into your servers, you probably need to have something that's air gapped. You should also call Tom Cruise because he's probably going to find a new stunt person. That will just about do it for this episode of the Tech Field Day podcast. I want to thank everybody for tuning in. Before we go, if people want to find out more information about where you guys create content and share your things, where can they go? Carol?
LinkedIn for me.
Okay.
LinkedIn and Blue Sky.
LinkedIn will work fine for me.
And we'll have links to their LinkedIn profiles and Blue Sky information and everything down in the show notes. We want to thank you all for tuning in. Remember that you can always find the latest episode of this podcast if you go to techfieldday.com/podcast. And remember that Tech Field Day is your home for all things related to enterprise IT. Tech Field Day is a part of the Futurum Group, and we publish our episodes on techfieldday.com as well as on our sister site, Techstrong TV. We'll be back next week with another great episode. Until then, thank you so much for tuning in, and make sure that you're sticking to the premise.